In 1967, after days of rioting over racial inequalities, Detroit is at its breaking point. After hearing a number of gunshots coming from an annex of a local hotel, police and National Guard surround the building and swarm inside. That's a rough but relatively accurate description of the lead up to the events that took place at the Algiers Hotel in Detroit in 1967. What isn't clear, at least legally speaking, what's never been confirmed, is the events that followed that. All we know is that 3 people died in that room and a number of people were assaulted. It's not really my place to discuss the events that took place or the accuracy of the film concerning those events. I'm not a historian, I'm not an American, it wouldn't make any sense for me to talk about it. What I can do is talk about how Detroit the film is constructed, how the performances are built inside it by the director, and ultimately what that film ends up being like. Kathryn Bigelow is a director who I think is often underrated and has a really interesting body of work. She's made vampire westerns and straight up action movies and some historical work before as well. And watching her develop her style over the course of her career is sort of fascinating. There's some amazing films in there. In particular, I'm very fond of her film Strange Days, which if you haven't seen it is definitely worth seeking out. Basically, most scenes in this are shot with multiple cameras at once, so they only have to do a couple of takes, so the performances remain quite fresh and the action feels very real. When they're intercutting, they're not cutting from one angle shot 2 days ago to one angle shot 4 days after. They're intercutting a real live performance taking place. In a film like Detroit that's all about one single moment really and what happened around it, that's a really important and powerful way to approach that. It's not just Bigelow, of course, but also Barry Ackroyd, who's the director of photography on the film, who's worked with people like Ken Loach and Paul Greengrass, who do a lot of improvisation in their work and also try and make things feel often very true to life. And if I remember correctly, there's quite a lot of multiple camera work, in particular in Ken Loach's work as well. Another thing that technique really gives more power to is the actors, because for them, the moments are much more real, they're less rehearsed, and they're more fresh because they only do them 2 or 3 times before they're done with the scene. That really comes across in the performances of Poulter and Algee Smith. Poulter plays this young, brutal policeman who's at the centre of a racially motivated, extremely nasty crime. And that's a role that could be really simplistic. It's one that he could reduce down to a couple of swaggering Klansman mannerisms. But in his performance, he pulls across a number of things behind the motivation of that man that maybe wouldn't have come across in a less interesting performance. You get this sense of him as someone who's maybe been to Vietnam or knows people who've come back from it. You get this sense of him trying to protect a community that he thinks he's part of, which obviously he's not really protecting, but you know, that's his motivation as a character. And you really get the sense that he thinks he's doing the right thing. A lot of issues-based films, the villains feel like villains, and that can be problematic when they're real people. The motivations on display here are much more real, and that comes across largely through Poulter's performance. As everything starts to go to shit as well, you can really see the pressure build up in him, and you can see him slowly breaking inside. And he pulls that out just scene by scene, ratcheting it up in his performance until you think you're going to explode at one point in the film. And I think that's a real testament to his abilities as an actor. It's weird for me to say that as well, because I always think of him as being a kid actor who's just sort of like funny and sweet, and really he's developed so much beyond that I'm having to rethink him at the moment. I had a weird similar thing with Daniel Kaluuya a couple of years ago. Smith, on the other hand, is able to inhabit this figure that's simultaneously very confident and sort of worldly, and at the same time slightly naive. And watching his character develop over that fateful night and the years that followed it really shows a lot of depth in his performance. I think it's a commanding role from him. It's quiet, but it grows and it stays in your mind long after the film finishes. Bigelow really stresses the documentarian approach to the film. She basically films this as if she's reconstructing actual events, which is true for some of it, but a lot of the film, you know, we can't tell exactly what happened. So she's really creating a work of fiction that's based very closely off real life. The opening of the film is a short animation with a lot of text that explains kind of the run-up to the riots and the Detroit Rebellion and what happened. And that, coupled with still photo and stock footage usage, really makes it feel like a documentary at times. I'm sort of split as to how to take that, because in one way it's sort of disingenuous, because it's essentially saying this is how things happened, when we know, and in fact the film says at the end, we will never be exactly sure as to what transpired in there, especially in a legal sense. It doesn't seem like that will be that clear. And also I think it can make the film feel, I don't know, almost cheap at points, because you have these multiple cameras and this sort of shaky cam and zooming in, and it's an idiom that we've mostly gotten used to in reality and in comedy TV. In particular, there's one bit in this where my audience actually laughed quite a lot when it was supposed to be a really serious moment, and it's because it had all these little like punchy zooms in that I think make people sometimes think more of like Brooklyn Nine-Nine than anything else. On the other hand, I respect and admire how much she sticks to that and how visceral it makes the film feel. It really feels like it's happening as we're watching it, like it's unfolding, almost like live TV, which is of course a strange idea because at the time there really wasn't live news in that sense. In constructing the events, Bigelow really has her hand very firmly on the pressure and just turns it up slowly throughout the course of the film until you're at boiling point. Inside the house, following the crime and looking at how that unfolds is the most important part of the film, and it's the most well crafted. Outside of that, it can feel a little bit like it's got too many threads at certain points, and the ending can drag slightly as well. It's important that they give that middle part of the film as much time as possible, because that's what they're trying to expose and kind of bring back into popular conscious right now. I understand that. But that opening that takes a long time, and in particular has like 3 or 4 almost full songs in it, just performed a cappella, feels like it could be cut down. I feel like that could be tighter. But the rest of the film is incredibly tight and very tense the whole way through. It's like a taut movie. It's really hard to think about in that middle section what they would cut, because it's all so important to have in there. This is probably the first film I've seen this year that's getting like proper Oscar buzz. I think Dunkirk will probably get some Oscars, but this is the first movie that's sort of been pitched to me as being an Oscars drama. And I think it's an important film to make right now. Obviously, talking about police violence, and especially police violence against black people, is really important in America and also in the UK at the moment. But I just can't help but feel this film is so close to that subject, and it wants it to be so accurate in how it treats that and so thought-provoking about that, that it doesn't quite succeed in being a film in its own right. And in that sense, it reminds me of a couple of other films, movies like Oranges and Sunshine, which is about the scandal where the British government transported children to Australia without their parents' permission in a lot of cases. And also The Magdalene Sisters, which is about the Magdalene Laundries, a bunch of Catholic Church-run institutions, essentially, for fallen women who'd gotten pregnant or had sometimes just been locked up because their families didn't want to deal with them. In both those cases, you get these films that have excellent performances and talk about an issue which nobody really was talking about enough, and which have really brought that to the fore in the public consciousness. And they also have this important work to do in the sense that they then become an artifact, a way that you might introduce people to that issue, and they can stick around for years afterwards and bring it up again and again, make sure people know about it. Detroit, I think, for me, falls into that category. It's a really good treatment of that issue, and it's also a good film in its own right, but it stops significantly short of, I guess, greatness, because it isn't able to let go of the factual basis for the film. You know, I think if there's a reason that you could forgive somebody for not letting their film be the film it could be, it's because they're trying to honour the memories of people who died in really tragic circumstances. And I think in this case, Detroit gets a sort of free pass for that, essentially. So if you're looking for a thought-provoking movie that deals with very contemporary issues, but by looking at them through a historical lens, I think that this is absolutely the film for you. And you will not be disappointed by its directing, its cinematography, or its acting. If you've seen Detroit and you want to talk about it, let me know in the comments down below. I'm really interested to see what other people's takes on this quite important film are. That's it from me. Have a good one, and I'll see you later. Bye for now.